used.
Unpredictable monsoon rains and a rapidly growing city are clearly big challenges here, but many hope that by conserving water, they'll at least start to reduce them. Ramyata Limbu, Al Jazeera, Kathmandu.
Now, a stone statue dating back 4,500 years has been found by a farmer in southern Gaza. The 22-centimetre high limestone statue depicts the face of the ancient Canaanite deity Anat, who was the goddess of love and war. It was unearthed by a farmer while he was working on his land in Khan Yunis. The Palestinian authorities say the statue was discovered on what was an important overland trade route. Time for a quick check of the headlines here on Al Jazeera. The UN says Moscow has agreed in principle to allow it to help with the evacuation of civilians from the Azovstal steel plant in the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres met Russia's President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Well, the Russian president described the situation in Mariupol as difficult and tragic, but Putin also said that Guterres had been misled about what's happening there.
There are no military actions being conducted in the Azovstal steel factory. We heard from the Ukrainian government that there are civilians inside the compound. In that case, Ukrainian military personnel are obliged to let them go. The simple thing is, with regards to evacuating those people, Mr. Secretary General, you have been deceived and misled. Over 100,000 people have left Mariupol. They can go anywhere they want. Some people want to go to Russia, some to Ukraine.
More than 40 countries have agreed to meet monthly to discuss arming Ukraine. Their first meeting was held at a US airbase in Germany on Tuesday. In a change of policy, Berlin says it will now provide Kyiv with heavy weapons, like tanks with anti-aircraft guns. Russia says it will turn off the gas to Poland and Bulgaria at 0600 GMT on Wednesday because they refused to pay for it in rubles. It's the first time since the start of the Ukraine war that Russia's made such a move. Bulgaria says it's made alternative arrangements. Poland says its gas storage facilities are nearly 80% full. The US Secretary of State has warned that Iran could be in a position to develop a nuclear weapon in a matter of weeks. That's down from previous assessments of about a year. Antony Blinken says a return to the 2015 nuclear deal is the best way to reduce any threat. He also said Tehran has accelerated its nuclear program in recent years. Well, those were the headlines. The news continues here on Al Jazeera after 101 East. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.
Outside of the conflict in Ukraine, how concerned should we be about this arms buildup?
We bring you the stories and developments that are rapidly changing the world we live in.
Has the yuan become Russia's new dollar, or is it becoming Russia's new dollar?
Counting the cost on Al Jazeera.
He was Thailand's most courageous cop, an investigator who took down a human trafficking syndicate led by a top military commander.
More than 40 guilty verdicts in Thailand's biggest human trafficking trial.
But Pawin Pongsaran believes the powerful men he arrested were protected by those even higher up.
สิ่งที่ผมได้รับการข่มขู่ก็มีมาจากทุกทางความคิดเห็นของผมนะครับการที่เขาพวกองค์คาพยพที่ใกล้ชิดกับทหารในขณะนั้นนะ
Now, for the first time, he's accusing some of the most well-connected men in Thailand of obstructing the investigation.
บอกให้ลาออกจากราชการดีกว่าเพื่อเอาชีวิตรอด
The military wanted him dead. They sent him down to the south where he'd be killed.
101 East investigates why one of Thailand's most decorated cops fled his country in fear for his life. In a small town not far from Melbourne, Australia, Pawin Pongsaran is often lonely. In Thailand, he was famous, a police major general. But here, he's a virtual nobody.
ผมจึงไม่มีความกังวลเลยว่าเมื่อผมทำหน้าที่อย่างถูกต้องแล้วเนี่ยผมจะได้รับผลที่ตามมาอย่างยากลำบากแบบนี้ผมไม่เคยคิดมาก่อนครับ
I I first met Paween 6 years ago, soon after he fled to Australia. Back then, he said he was too scared to reveal who had threatened him. Now, he's finally overcome that fear.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, Paween.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. ถ้าหากไม่กล้าเปิดเผยนั่นคือการแสดงความเห็นแก่ตัวเอง ดังนั้นผมจึงต้องการที่จะเปิดเผยความจริงต่างๆ แม้จะต้องประสบกับอันตรายต่างๆ และสิ่งที่เราไม่คาดคิดจะตามมาในอนาคตก็ตาม
During his glittering 33-year career in the force, Paween was famous for staring down danger.
I have the golden plate from the Prime Minister.
Is this the Prime Minister?
Yeah. All this photo I have received the reward from my boss every year.
Looking back at his career highlights, it's clear that the Thai government used to praise Paween as a model policeman.
The best investigator 3 times. I got it every year. No people can fight me. I'm one every time.
He was known as a dogged investigator, unafraid to arrest people with money and power.
And what's this one? How a tough policeman backed by soldiers cleaned up Phuket.
But in a country where police corruption is commonplace, Paween's integrity earned him enemies as well as newspaper headlines.
Because the politician call me, please help my friend. No, it's illegal. If you call me, I will arrest you because you make illegal. You can't control me.
So you were arresting criminals, but some of these criminals were the friends of the politicians.
Yeah.
In 2015, Paween faced off against more criminals with friends in politics. And this time, the stakes couldn't be higher.
6 more bodies have been found buried in a Thai jungle. They're suspected to be Rohingya Muslims and were discovered near another mass grave.
Desperate people driven into the arms of ruthless criminals and passed along a trail of misery and torture, many hundreds lost along the way.
In May that year, mass graves were uncovered at jungle camps on the Thai-Malaysian border.
It's a big camp, it's a big facility.
Thousands of Rohingya refugees from Myanmar who were trying to reach Malaysia had been imprisoned by human traffickers here. If their families couldn't pay a ransom, they were sold into slavery on fishing boats, factories and rubber plantations.
It's a trade that can only flourish with the active assistance and corruption of government officials.
They were starved, tortured, raped and sometimes beaten to death.
ตรงนี้ได้สร้างความอับอายให้กับประเทศไทยเป็นอย่างยิ่งทำให้ทั่วโลกมองว่าประเทศไทยเป็นประเทศที่ป่าเถื่อน
It was a vicious trade that had been quietly growing for at least 10 years. With international outrage threatening critical Thai exports, Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha decided to crack down.
ข้อสำคัญคือเจ้าที่ของเรารัฐก็ต้องกลับดูแลเรื่องเหล่านี้นะครับที่ผ่านมาก็ไม่ค่อยมีประสิทธิภาพเท่าที่ควร
Paween's superiors turned to him to lead the investigation because they knew he got results.
How did you feel about taking on this assignment?
ผมไม่อยากมาทำผมไม่อยากจะทำให้ผมเจอปัญหาอะไรต่างๆอีกแต่เนื่องจากเป็นคำสั่งของผู้บัญชาที่สั่งผมโดยตรงผมจึงปฏิเสธไม่ได้
Paween was a hardened cop, but he'd never been exposed to the kind of brutality inflicted on the Rohingya in the secret jungle camps.
I was given a video that was filmed by someone in your team, and I'd just like you to look at this for me and tell me what you think, what you remember of it.
This man was so weak from hunger he could no longer walk. Police found him crawling along the ground, eating leaves.
How do you feel?
I'm very sad. At the moment, sometimes I'm crying when I have a private. I don't believe what happened in my country.
With a team of around 100 investigators behind him, Paween did what he does best. He followed the evidence. They began meticulously mapping a vast criminal syndicate stretching across Thailand, Myanmar, Bangladesh and Malaysia. Within days of starting work, he secured arrest warrants for a local mayor and several wealthy Thai businessmen.
และขนคนเนี่ยเข้ามาไม่น้อยกว่าเป็นแสนคนการขนคนเข้ามาจำนวนมากขนาดนี้เนี่ยย่อมได้รับความร่วมมือจากเจ้าหน้าที่ของรัฐไม่ว่าจะเป็นทหารตำรวจฝ่ายปกครองหรือองค์กรท้องถิ่นในประเทศไทยเรา
But although he'd been ordered to get results, from very early on he encountered high-level obstruction. Paween says an investigating officer told his team he'd been ordered to withhold crucial evidence by a deputy police commissioner, General Jaktep Chaijandar.
จากทิปสั่งไว้ว่าอย่าส่งมาให้ทีมงานชุดนี้ให้เก็บเอาไว้ความจริงมันก็เลยปรากฏออกมาให้เห็นอย่างนี้ครับ
Internal police correspondence obtained by 101 East shows the investigators had to appeal up the chain of command to secure the evidence. Bank slips incriminating one of the ringleaders. Was it someone his bosses wanted to protect? Paween was starting to make some powerful enemies, but he was also getting results.
เมื่อตรวจสอบสลิปโอนเงินเนี่ยมันมีการโอนเงินเนี่ยจากผู้ค้ามนุษย์เนี่ยมาให้พลโทมนัสคงแป้นเนี่ยประมาณ10 กว่าล้านบาทในขณะนั้นซึ่งระยะเวลาในการโอนเงินเนี่ยไม่กี่เดือนเท่านั้นเองผมทีแรกเมื่อได้เห็นเนี่ยผมก็ตกใจว่าทำไมหลักฐานมันชัดแจ้งอย่างนี้
Manat Kongpan was a lieutenant general in the army who controlled security in the south of Thailand. For 7 years, he'd been responsible for implementing Thailand's policy towards the Rohingya there.
จะต้องป้องกันไม่ให้ใครขนคนเนี่ยเข้ามาในเขตพื้นที่ของประเทศไทยนั่นเป็นหน้าที่ของเขาแต่ปรากฏว่าเขาทำในสิ่งที่ตรงข้ามมันยืนยันได้เลยว่าทหารเนี่ยเกี่ยวข้องกับการค้ามนุษย์อย่างแน่นอน
Paween believes Deputy Police Commissioner Jaktep wanted to curry favour with the generals who'd seized power in a coup the year before.
และจากทิพย์เนี่ยอยากจะเป็นผบตรจึงต้องการที่จะให้ทหารช่วยจากทิพย์สิ่งใดก็แล้วแต่ที่จากทิพย์ช่วยทหารได้จากทิพย์ก็จะทำแม้กระทั่งการทำลายพยานหลักฐานกับผู้กระทำความผิดคดีค้ามนุษย์เนี่ย
Never before had the Thai police targeted such a high-ranking military officer. Paween held his nerve as others feared for his safety.
คือวันเราไปขอออกหมายจับพลโทมนัสคงแป้นเนี่ย2 ครั้งด้วยกันครั้งแรกเลยเนี่ยผู้พิพากษาเนี่ยตกใจกลัวมากตัวสั่นหมดเลยครับถามว่าคุณไม่กลัวเหรอคุณเป็นนักเรียนในล้อหรือเปล่า
According to Paween, as the team zeroed in on military involvement, the interference escalated. He says Police Colonel Surachet Hakpan, a liaison to Deputy Prime Minister General Prawit Wongsuwan, called with a highly unusual and troubling request.
บอกว่าพลเอกประวิตรวงษ์สุวรรณเนี่ยให้โทรศัพท์มาถามขอให้ช่วยเหลือให้ประกันตัวอนุญาตให้ประกันตัวพลโทมนัสคงแป้นเมื่อมามอบตัวแล้วถ้าหากว่าเป็นคนอื่นโทรมาเนี่ยผมอาจจะไม่ประหลาดใจแต่เนี่ยพลเอกประวิตรวงษ์สุวรรณซึ่งรับผิดชอบเรื่องการปราบปรามการค้ามนุษย์โดยตรงจะทำให้พยานต่างๆที่เข้ามาเป็นพยานเนี่ยเกิดความตกใจกลัวหรือไปทำลายพยานหลักฐานถ้าเราให้ประกันตัวไป
The witnesses had good reason to be alarmed when they saw the man accused of running the syndicate flanked by senior army supporters.
ตั้งแต่ผ พลโทมานัสคงแป้นเนี่ยไปมอบตัวที่สำนักงานตำรวจแห่งชาติแล้วก็ผู้บัญชาการตำรวจแห่งชาติเปิดห้องรับรองอย่างดีเมื่อมาถึงที่สถานีตำรวจอำเภอหาดใหญ่สภาพของโรงพักบริเวณด้านหน้าเนี่ยไม่เหมือนสถานีตำรวจแล้วลักษณะคล้ายเป็นค่ายทหารเพราะมีรถทหารเป็นรถหุ้มเกราะมาจอดเนี่ยหลายคันมีนายทหารเนี่ยเดินบริเวณพื้นที่สอบสวนเนี่ยเต็มไปหมด
Surachet Hakpan, now a police lieutenant general, did not respond to 101 East's request for comment on the allegation that he pressured Pawin to grant Manat bail. 101 East has learned that even in custody, Manat was allegedly able to intimidate witnesses. According to a formal complaint by the chief witness against Manat, which has never been made public, police led her into a room where he confronted her.
Then he threatened me. Your life has a long way to go. Do you really think they can protect you forever? I will witness everything in court. I will get back at every one of you.
Pawin says he received many other warnings and threats from high-ranking police and army officers closely connected to the military government. He documented them all in this statutory declaration, which formed the basis for his asylum application here in Australia.
He told me that the army is very upset that I arrested General Manat Kongpan. I was very scared when I heard this news. Being told again that the Prime Minister was angry at me made me really fear for my life. ผมถูกรัฐมนตรีกระทรวงยุติธรรมซึ่งขณะนั้นคนที่ดำรงตำแหน่งคือพลเอกไพบูลย์คุ้มฉายาได้เรียกไปด่าว่าใช้คำกล่าวคำถ้อยคำที่หยาบคาย
The Justice Minister was furious, Pawin says, and ordered him to stop arresting military officials.
สิ่งที่ผมได้รับการข่มขู่ก็มีมาจากทุกทางความคิดเห็นของผมนะครับการที่เขาพวกองคาพยพที่ใกล้ชิดกับทหารในขณะนั้นนะ
Oh my God.
We give a copy of Pawin's statutory declaration to Professor Paul Chambers, an expert on Thai civil-military relations at Thailand's Naresuan University.
Amazing. This is rich.
What really stands out for you?
Well, it's how clear it is written that the leaders of the junta at the time were involved in trying to silence Pawin. There was an inspector inside the military who was intimidating Pawin. That's supposed to be the guy investigating. He's inside the military making threats. Who gave that inspector the job? Pawit. And he's the problem.
คิดว่ามาจากรองนายกรัฐมนตรีก็คือพลเอกประวิตรวงษ์สุวรรณเพราะว่าคนที่ทำงานใกล้ชิดกับประวิตรทั้งนั้นที่มาเตือนสั่งให้หยุดไม่ให้จับทหาร
With 91 suspects behind bars, Pawin was forced to wrap up his investigation at the end of September 2015. He'd run out of financial and political support. Days later, a new Police Commissioner General was appointed. It was none other than Jaktep Chaijandar, the man who'd allegedly tried to withhold crucial evidence from Pawin.
การที่สั่งให้หยุดเพราะว่าการสืบสวนสอบสวนของผมเนี่ยอาจจะไปกระทบต่อผลประโยชน์ของคนระดับสูงที่สูงกว่ามนัสเขาจึงสั่งให้หยุดการที่เราจับกุมมาแค่นั้นนะเป็นแค่ภูเขาน้ำแข็งเอง
This time, Paween received no praise or commendation for his work. Instead, less than 3 weeks after Chaktip became Thailand's top cop, an order was issued transferring Paween to the southern border provinces. This military-controlled region was crawling with traffickers and corrupt officials, including several of Paween's suspects who were still at large.
ผมตกใจมากการที่ส่งผมไปอยู่ตรงนั้นน่ะเหมือนกับส่งผมไปให้ศัตรูรวมทั้งเพื่อนตำรวจก็มาเตือนว่าเขาล็อกเป้าถ้าไปก็คงจะไม่มีชีวิตกลับมาตรงนั้นแหละผมรู้แล้วว่าเขาต้องการที่จะเอาชีวิตผม
The military wanted him dead. They sent him down to the south where he'd be killed. He had to get out.
Who made the decision to transfer you?
เป็นคณะกรรมการข้าราชการตำรวจที่มีประวิตรเป็นประธานแล้วก็มีจักรทิพย์เป็นกรรมการร่วมอยู่ด้วยซึ่งจักรทิพย์แล้วก็ประวิตรไม่พอใจในการทำงานผมอยู่แล้วผมก็ได้ปรึกษาคนใกล้ชิดคนที่ผมไว้วางใจเขาบอกให้ลาออกจากราชการดีกว่าเพื่อเอาชีวิตรอดนั่นแหละเป็นการตัดสินใจครั้งสำคัญที่สุดในชีวิตครั้งหนึ่งแล้วผมเสียใจนะครับตอนนั้นยังไม่อยากที่จะลาออกครับแล้วผมรู้ว่าเนี่ยคือรางวัลที่ทำเพื่อประเทศชาติเนี่ยสิ่งที่ผมได้รับรางวัลคือสิ่งนี้
Paween's most important and successful mission would also be his last. No longer feeling safe in Thailand, he flew to Australia and applied for asylum.
The top policeman running the investigation has fled for his life and he's seeking political asylum in Australia.
He even gave a couple of interviews without naming names.
ยังไม่สมบูรณ์มีเจ้าหน้าที่อีกหลายส่วนที่ต้องถูกดำเนินคดี
The new Police Commissioner General quickly hit back.
คือเขาทำงานเขาคาดหวังอะไรหรือเปล่าผมไม่ทราบนะฮะทำงานเรื่องนี้เสร็จควรจะได้เลื่อนตำแหน่งสูงขึ้นหรือเปล่าแล้วไม่ได้แล้วผิดหวังคือต้องพูดให้หมดอย่าพูดครึ่งเดียวทหารเขาก็เสียหายตำรวจเองก็เสียหายนะแปลออกมาตำรวจเลวทหารเลวเนี่ยพูดอย่างนี้ไม่ถูกอย่าเอาองค์กรมาขายอย่าทำร้ายประเทศนะครับเรื่องส่วนตัวก็เรื่องส่วนตัวถ้าด่านหาออกมายังโดนข้อหาเลยนะครับผมถือว่าไม่ใช่ลูกผู้ชาย
What did you think when you heard Police Commissioner Chaktip's comments after you'd spoken to the media here in Australia?
ไม่ประหลาดใจเพราะว่าจักรทิพย์เนี่ยเป็นคนที่บิดเบือนต่อข้อเท็จจริงตลอดจริงๆแล้วเขาควรจะเป็นผู้ต้องหาของผมด้วยก็คือการที่มีคำสั่งของเขาคนที่ไปตรวจค้นสลิปของพลโทมานัสแล้วให้เก็บไว้ไม่ให้ส่งมาที่ผมนั่นคือการขัดขวางกระบวนการยุติธรรมที่ชัดเจนอยู่แล้ว
101 East contacted Deputy Prime Minister Prawit Wongsuwan, former Justice Minister Paibun Kumchaya, Police Lieutenant General Surachet Hakpan and former National Police Commissioner Jaktip Chaijindar to respond to Paween's allegations. They all either declined or did not answer our inquiries. It's been more than 6 years since Paween's seen his family. He left in such a hurry he didn't even have time to say goodbye. When he arrived in Australia, he spoke barely a word of English.
จะบอกว่าไม่เสียใจเนี่ยมันก็โกหกตัวเองผมก็มีความเสียใจมันว้าเหวนะมันห่างไกลครอบครัวคนที่เรารักเนี่ยมันรู้สึกโดดเดี่ยวอ้างว้างแล้วก็วังเวงมากบางครั้งครับ แต่มันก็ต้องผ่านตรงนี้ไปให้ได้ครับ
Paween knows that he'll never work as a policeman again. He worked for a while in a plant nursery, and now he's got a job in a factory on the outskirts of Melbourne.
ช่วงเวลาเนี่ยผมไปทำงานที่โรงงานทำเบาะรถยนต์งานที่ผมทำเนี่ยก็คือการติดกระดุมเนี่ยบนหนังใช่ไหม
You were one of Thailand's most senior police officers, and now you're doing manual labour in a factory. Is it hard to adjust to that?
จะว่ายากก็ยากแต่มันไม่มีทางเลือกอีกอย่างหนึ่งเราต้องยืนอยู่บนขาของตัวเองให้ได้
What do you think about when you're at work?
ในบางครั้งบางเวลาก็หวนไปคิดถึงงานเก่าๆที่เคยทำมาโดยเฉพาะคดีสุดท้ายที่ทำเนี่ยนึกอยู่ตลอดเวลานะครับมารบกวนจิตใจอยู่ตลอดครับ
So 6 years later, day after day, you're still replaying the events of 2015?
ใช่ครับเพราะว่าเรื่องนี้มันทำให้มันเปลี่ยนชีวิตของผมจากเดิมจากหน้ามือเป็นหลังมือ
And it still feels like unfinished business.
ใช่เพราะว่าคดีเนี่ยมันยังไม่จบแล้วที่ทำไปมันก็ยังไม่สมบูรณ์แล้วก็ผมเนี่ยไม่อยากให้เห็นคนเนี่ยมาเป็นทาสซึ่งมันเป็นเรื่องที่กระทบต่อความรู้สึกของผมมากผมคาดการณ์ไม่ถูกแต่สิ่งที่ผมอยากจะบอกก็คือว่าได้นำความจริงที่ผมได้ประสบพบเจอเล่าสู่สังคมประเทศไทยรวมทั้งคนทั่วโลกได้รับรู้
To get his story out, Paween wants to start a debate in the highest halls of Thailand's government. So he sent a copy of his statutory declaration to an influential opposition politician. Next week, we'll be in Bangkok in the Thai Parliament to witness the fallout when Paween's story goes public. What impact will his explosive allegations have in Thailand?
From the world's most populated region, in-depth stories from across Asia and the Pacific, with diverse cultures and conflicting politics. 101 East on Al Jazeera.
There is no channel that covers world news like we do. The scale of this camp is like nothing you've ever seen. Access to healthcare is something. What we want to know is how do these things affect people? We revisit places, we stay, even when there are no international headlines. Al Jazeera really invests in that, and that's a privilege as a journalist.
May on Al Jazeera.
Frontline reporting and in-depth analysis, we bring you the latest on the Ukraine war and the unfolding humanitarian crisis.
Documentaries that inspire. Witness brings world issues into focus through compelling human stories.
Almost 6 decades after Fidel Castro's proclamation of the Communist Republic of Cuba, we explore the issues shaping the country's future.
Al Jazeera's investigative program Fault Lines returns with a special series on abuse in the Boy Scouts of America.
Lebanon goes to the polls, but will political change help the country find its way out of its crippling economic crisis?
May on Al Jazeera.
Witness love, witness war, witness the world, witness next door. Witness life. Witness on Al Jazeera.
Russia agrees in principle to let the UN and Red Cross help evacuate civilians trapped in Mariupol, following a meeting between the UN chief and President Putin. Hello, I'm Darren Jordan. This is Al Jazeera, live from Doha. Also coming up, Germany is to send 50 anti-aircraft systems to Ukraine in a major policy shift as more than 40 countries agreed to meet monthly to discuss arming Kyiv. With uncertainties surrounding an agreement with Iran, the US warns Tehran might be just weeks away from building a nuclear bomb. And Colombian military commanders acknowledged their role in thousands of extrajudicial killings to falsify progress in the conflict with FARC rebels. Russia has agreed in principle to allow the UN and Red Cross to help with the evacuation of civilians on the Azovstal steel plant in the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol. The agreement was reached during talks between UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Some Ukrainian troops are also trapped inside the plant, where they've rejected Russian demands for surrender. Dulce Jabari reports.
The world's most senior diplomat is in Moscow on a mission. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he has come to the Russian capital as a messenger of peace. His audience, the most controversial world leader at the moment, Russian President Vladimir Putin, who received the Secretary General with high praise for his organization.
Russia, as one of the founding countries of the United Nations and a permanent member of the Security Council, has always supported this universal organization. And we believe that it is not just universal, but unique in its kind. There is no such organization in the international community, and we strongly support the principles on which it is based, and we intend to do so in the future.
Guterres seemingly not mincing any words about how the United Nations sees Russia's so-called special military operation in Ukraine.
I understand these grievances, but from our perspective, the grievances must be solved according to the different instruments that the UN Charter has at its disposal. And the one thing that we firmly believe is that the violation of the territorial integrity of a country is completely out of order in relation to the Charter.
Earlier in the day, Guterres kicked off his trip with a meeting at the Russian Foreign Ministry and a working lunch with Sergei Lavrov. The two officials discussed for nearly 2 hours the situation in Ukraine. They emerged from what was described as a frank conversation.
It is clear that there are two different positions on what is happening in Ukraine. According to the Russian Federation, what is taking place is a special military operation with the objectives that were announced. According to the UN, in line with the resolutions passed by the General Assembly, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a violation of its territorial integrity and against the Charter of the United Nations.
The Russian foreign minister once again defended his country's decision.
This was happening as a result of the actions of the US and its allies and the unipolar world. As for our geopolitical sphere, it was done in the interest of containing Russia, and to that end, for many years, Ukraine has been used as a springboard to restrain our country.
One of the main initiatives put forward by the Secretary General involved ending the humanitarian crisis in the besieged port city of Mariupol. The city is now under Russian control, according to the Defense Ministry, but thousands of civilians are unable to leave it, something Vladimir Putin dismissed as misinformation. Guterres has proposed setting up a contact working group made up of Russian, Ukrainian, and UN members to ensure that all residents wishing to leave can do so and to allow aid into the area. After a 2-hour meeting with the Russian president, the UN says Vladimir Putin has agreed in principle to the involvement of the agency along with the International Committee of the Red Cross to oversee the evacuation of civilians from the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. The UN Secretary General seemingly managed to achieve what many world leaders have failed to do so far: As he travels to Ukraine, he will be looking for officials there to approve this plan as well. All the while, the nearly 1,000 civilians continue to wait to get out of the underground tunnels in one of Europe's largest steel plants. Dorso Jabari, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
At least 3 people have been killed and 7 injured in the latest Russian airstrikes and shelling in Kharkiv. That's according to the regional governor. Ukraine's second largest city has seen some of the worst fighting since Russian forces withdrew from around the capital, Kyiv. Russia says it will turn off the gas to Poland and Bulgaria on Wednesday because they refuse to pay for it in rubles. It's the first time since the start of the Ukraine war that Russia has made such a move. Last month, Putin had warned unfriendly foreign buyers to pay the Russian state-owned gas company in rubles instead of dollars and euros. Bulgaria says it's made alternative arrangements. Poland says its gas storage facilities are 76% full. Now, more than 40 countries have agreed to meet monthly to discuss arming Ukraine. The first meeting of this broad coalition was held at a US airbase in Germany. And after coming under pressure for refusing to provide Kyiv with heavy weapons, the German government performed a major policy U-turn. Step Vassen reports from Ramstein Air Base.
After his surprise visit to Kyiv last weekend, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin told more than 40 defense ministers and officials of countries worldwide that they needed to do more for Ukraine to win the war.
We don't have any time to waste. The briefings today laid out clearly why the coming weeks will be so crucial for Ukraine. So we've got to move at the speed of war. And I know that all the leaders leave today more resolved than ever to support Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression and atrocities.
He used Ramstein Air Base in Germany, the largest U.S. air base outside of the U.S., to bring NATO ministers, but also those from the Middle East, Africa and Asia together. The location was significant because especially Germany had been reluctant to send heavy weapons to Ukraine. Not anymore.
We decided on Monday to support Ukraine with Gepard anti-aircraft systems, which is exactly what Ukraine needs right now to secure its airspace from the ground. This has become clear again today.
The Gepard or Cheetah anti-aircraft systems are not the combat tanks Ukraine had asked for weeks ago, but it is seen as a breakthrough after the German government was worried about being drawn into a war with Russia, and Chancellor Olaf Scholz warned a few days ago for the possibility of a nuclear war.
While many in Europe were looking at Germany to lead efforts to support Ukraine, the United States has now stepped in. With this meeting on German soil, the United States has managed to convince countries like Germany, who are still reluctant to send heavy weapons, to make a turnaround. But the main question now is how nervous this will make people here that the war will expand beyond Ukraine. Step Vassen from the Ramstein Air Base in Germany.
The UK's intelligence agencies say about 15,000 Russian troops have been killed since the war began. Moscow has only acknowledged 1,300 troop deaths and says fewer than 4,000 others were injured. But Britain's Defence Secretary told Parliament the actual figure is far higher. Russia's also believed to have lost 2,000 armoured vehicles along with 60 helicopters and fighter jets. Let's bring in Lawrence Korb. He's senior fellow at the Centre for American Progress and a former US Assistant Secretary of Defence. He joins us via Skype from Washington, D.C. Lawrence, good to have you back with us. So the UK estimates that Russia's lost over 15,000 soldiers, 2,000 armoured vehicles. How robust are these estimates? And if true, can Russia sustain these losses as the war drags on?
I think they're much more correct than what the Russians are saying actually happened, because they had very poor logistics. The soldiers had terrible morale. They thought it would just be a cakewalk. They'd walk in and take over Kiev, and they'd be greeted as liberators because the people in Ukraine really wanted to be part of Russia. We know for a fact, even the Russians have admitted 7 generals have been killed. So if you had 7 generals killed, the chances are you had close to 20,000 troops killed or wounded.
Lawrence, we saw this initial Russian move to take the capital, Kyiv, but that failed. Now Russia says it's focusing its operations in Donbas, but this is a much slower and more deliberate military advance. Are we likely then to see many more Russian losses here?
Well, I think you will, because Yes, they are, going to the south and the east. They want to have a land bridge from the Donbas over to Crimea, which they annexed in 2014. But the fact of the matter is, you can't take these cities just by shelling. You're going to have to go in. And even if you can get in, the Ukrainians have developed counterinsurgency or insurgency practices already. Right before they started the war, they were developing the capability for insurgency. So you might conquer it, but then you're going to have to deal with all the insurgents, like we found out, for example, in Vietnam, and how the Russians found out in Afghanistan when they went in there in the 70s and 80s.
And we know that NATO allies have been meeting in Germany as Berlin agrees to send heavy weapons to Ukraine. How much of a difference, Lawrence, will all this Western weaponry have on the battle space, particularly in the fight for Donbas in the east?
Well, I think it'll have a significant difference because up to now, the equipment had been more defensive. This is also offensive equipment. And what it means is not only will they be able to repel the Russians or exact a high cost, but they'll be able to advance because they're now going to have. In fact, the United States sent them drones that we haven't even given to our own troops yet. They're so advanced, and the Germans finally started sending heavy equipment today. So, no, I think they have the capability to make some advances, not only repel them, but after repelling them, make some advances from areas they control, like Mariupol.
Lawrence, just a final thought to you. All right, so with the West increasing military aid and sanctions, what is the Russian end game here? What will Putin settle for to end this conflict? And do you think the West will give him an off-ramp?
Well, I think he could allow, for example, the people in Donbas to make their own decision about whether they want to be part of Ukraine or Russia, because they have an awful lot of people who lean toward Russia. The West might recognize his illegal annexation of Crimea. That would be another face-saving way out for him. But when Lavrov starts talking about nuclear weapons, they're worried about what's going on.
Lawrence Korb, always good to get your insight. Lawrence, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll have more on Ukraine later, including digging up bodies in the hunt for war criminals. Detectives face a grim task in their search for justice. Plus, Kim Jong-un vows to ramp up North Korea's nuclear arsenal at a military parade showing off its latest ballistic missiles. More on that. Stay with us.
The journey has begun. The FIFA World Cup is on its way to Qatar. Book your travel package today.
Hello, we've got some very heavy rain in the forecast for Japan, albeit briefly. We've got this massive cloud now sweeping through. It does go through pretty quickly. This weather front will slide through, some very heavy rain on that, and that could lead to some localized flooding, a little bit of traffic disruption. We are going to see things clear up, brighten up as we go on through Wednesday. So 26 Celsius there in Tokyo. Further north, some wintry weather just sliding out of the far east of Russia. That clips the far north of Hokkaido, moves through, bright skies come back in behind, a tad cooler, but largely fine and dry and settled. This band of rain, that makes its way back into central parts of China. Still got some very heavy downpours here, the risk of some travel disruption. North of that, on the cool side there for Beijing at 17 Celsius. South of that, on the hot side for Hong Kong at around 32 degrees. Further south, we've got the usual rash of showers across Indochina. Some big and lively showers coming into central and southern parts of the Philippines over the next day or so. Northern parts of Borneo also seeing some heavy showers. Java, Sumatra, again seeing the usual heat of the day, downpours coming through. Not too bad across southern parts of India and Sri Lanka over the next day or so. Further north, the pre-monsoon heat continues to build.
Qatar Airways, official airline of the journey.
The climate has changed every year for millions of years.
Decades of talk, but little action.
It's all about distraction, create confusion to create smoke and mirrors.
The shocking truth about how the climate debate has been systematically subverted.
The oil industry was a main bankroller for opposition to climate action.
The campaign against the climate.
Do you think that's a bad thing?
More CO2 in the atmosphere is a good thing.
Absolutely.
On Al Jazeera.
Welcome back. A quick reminder of our top stories here this hour. The UN says Moscow has agreed in principle to allow it to help with the evacuation of civilians from the Azovstal steel plant in the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres met Russia's President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. More than 40 countries have agreed to meet monthly to discuss arming Ukraine. Their first meeting was held at a US airbase in Germany on Tuesday. In a change of policy, Berlin says it will now provide Kiev with heavy weapons. At least 3 people have been killed in Russian airstrikes and shelling in the city of Kharkiv. Another person was killed in a rocket attack in the city of Zaporizhia, the last southeastern city under Ukrainian control. Now, Ukraine's government is investigating more than 500 suspects for committing thousands of potential war crimes. Evidence is being gathered across the country. Oda Abdulhamid travelled to villages north of Kyiv and sent us this report.
Ever since the Russians pulled out a few weeks ago, Detective Victoria Nemerova and her team have been exhuming bodies, at least 10 daily. A task she never thought she would be doing when she first joined the police. This time, her team is unearthing the body of a person buried in the backyard of a house. They carefully dig, carving around the body, trying to figure out how it's positioned. These are the feet, so the head is over there, she says. A first assessment reveals it's a man who appears to be in his 60s. It's only when they flip the body over that she finds a clue into the cause of death.
He's got a wound at the back of the head. Most likely it's from a bullet because he had blood coming out of the mouth. The body is decomposing and the skin is stuck to the clothes. So in order not to damage it more, we will take him away and then the forensic experts will investigate further. We found his phone, we will charge it and hopefully find out more about him.
The full scope of what happened when the Russian soldiers left the towns north of Kyiv is still not clear, but the trail of destruction left behind is evident. Civilians have been telling about how they were directly targeted as they were trying to flee. There are bullet holes all over this windshield, but this car was hit by some large caliber ammunition from the side here. And you can see still the remains of what appears to be a white flag, marking the fact that they were civilians in this vehicle. And then here on this side of the car, you see the point of exit of whatever ripped through the car, and inside it's mayhem. You still actually have blood stains everywhere, and in the middle of all that, a passport. It belongs to a young man who was born in September 1990.
Children who killed, this is the number, and there are children, but again we don't.
It's another example of alleged war crimes among the thousands of cases that investigators have been documenting, says Ukraine's prosecutor general. She has dispatched teams around the country to gather evidence. Here in Borodyanka, they set up in a classroom, and it's full of people telling their stories.
Again, killing civilians. Some of them were after torture civilians. We now started to prosecute sexual crimes, raping. We see it, unfortunately. We see that they took property of civilians. We see again that they bombed again and again, they bombed civilian infrastructure. Hospitals, kindergartens, schools, more than 1,000 educational institutions destroyed in Ukraine. What is this? Of course it's military, it is war crime.
In nearby Bucha, the morgue is overwhelmed. Refrigerated trucks are also overflowing with bodies. Olga finally found her husband after coming here for several days. He was killed while she was away in Poland.
The neighbors called and said me he was shot on March 20th. He was going to the garage to get some food. 2 Russian soldiers saw him, ran after him and shot him twice. The Russians didn't allow the body to be picked up for 3 days.
Russia denies committing any atrocities, suggesting they've been staged. But the UN Human Rights Office says there is growing evidence of war crimes committed by Russian soldiers, and fears many more could emerge as the fighting continues in the east and south of the country. Abdelhamid, Al Jazeera, north of Kyiv.
The head of the UN's nuclear watchdog has described the seizure of the Chernobyl nuclear plant by Russian troops as very dangerous and says another accident could have occurred there. Rafael Grossi made the comments during a visit to the decommissioned site on the 36th anniversary of its meltdown. Russian troops moved into the radiation-contaminated Chernobyl exclusion zone in February, but withdrew late last month. Communications and international monitoring were disrupted at the time, but Grossi says his team is working to get the plant back online. The US Secretary of State has warned Iran could be in a position to develop a nuclear weapon in a matter of weeks. That's down from previous assessments of about a year. Anthony Blinken says a return to the 2015 nuclear deal is the best way to reduce any threat. He also said Tehran has accelerated its nuclear program in recent years.
We've now tested two propositions. One was the nuclear agreement that was originally reached, and that significantly set back Iranian capabilities to pursue a nuclear weapon, particularly the fissile material for such a weapon. And that agreement was working by all objective accounts. We've tested the other proposition, which was pulling out of the agreement, trying to exert more pressure, and we've also seen the result. And the result has been that that nuclear program, which had pushed back the breakout time to a year in terms of being able to produce fissile material for a weapon, that's now down to a matter of weeks.
And Mike Hanna joins us live now from Washington, D.C. Mike, so the U.S. is expressing concern about the speed with which Iran is developing nuclear weapons. What's the context of all this, then?
Very much there. Well, the Secretary of State there saying that the time for Iran to develop a weapon is now a matter of weeks rather than what previous estimates were around a year, according to U.S. intelligence officials. But he was speaking there to a Senate hearing, once again appearing to defend the U.S. decision to try and get the Iran nuclear plan back in place, remembering that this was stopped